today, we're going to really try to dig into what's happening in Sudan.
Right.
It's a very complicated situation with the Sudanese army and their claim about taking back the presidential palace.
Yeah, the presidential palace in Khartoum.
Exactly.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Not just the actual event, but what it means.
Like what it symbolizes and what it could tell us about where things are going.
Absolutely.
So we've got some excerpts from a news report. Looks like CNN was the source for this one.
Okay.
And we're going to try to see what we can learn.
Yeah, let's cut through the noise and figure out what's really going on.
Exactly. Because this war has been going on for a while now, and it's just been devastating.
Devastating.
So many lives lost, so many people forced from their homes.
It's hard to even comprehend the scale of the suffering.
Yeah, it's really just awful.
It is. And this whole thing with the presidential palace, it's so interesting because on the one hand, it's just one building.
Right.
But on the other hand, it's so loaded with meaning.
It's like a symbol for the whole country.
Exactly. Like whoever controls that building, it says something about who's really in charge.
So let's rewind back to March 21st of this year.
Okay.
That's when the Sudanese army, the LAFF, came out and said they had taken control of the palace.
Big announcement.
Huge.
And they didn't exactly downplay it either.
No, they were really emphasizing what they saw as a victory.
Yeah, the information minister, Khalid El-Azhar, he went on X and said, "Today the flag is raised, the palace is back, and the journey continues until victory is complete."
Wow.
And the Justice Ministry called it the liberation of the Republican Palace.
Oh, wow.
They said it was a symbol of national sovereignty.
So they're definitely sending a message.
Oh, absolutely. They're trying to project strength and legitimacy.
Show that they're the ones in control.
Yeah, they're speaking to their own people, to the international community, everyone.
But of course, it's never that simple.
Never.
Because just hours later, the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, they put out their own statement.
I bet they did.
Yeah, on Telegram, they said, hold on, the battle for the palace isn't over.
Okay, so they're directly contradicting the SAF.
Exactly. They said their fighters were still close by and that they had even launched an attack inside the palace.
Targeting personnel inside.
Yeah. And they claimed they took out vehicles and inflicted casualties.
So basically they're saying, we're still in this fight.
Yeah, don't count us out.
And it really highlights how messy this whole situation is.
Oh, yeah, the fog of war.
Exactly. We're getting these conflicting reports, and it's hard to know what to believe.
We have to be really careful with the information we're getting.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth reminding ourselves about the bigger picture here.
Right. The fact that this is all happening within a truly horrific war.
A war that's been raging for almost 2 years now.
Since April 2023.
And the numbers are just staggering.
Over 28,000 people killed.
11 million forced to flee their homes.
11 million, can you imagine?
It's hard to wrap your head around that kind of displacement.
And to think Khartoum has been under siege by the RSF for most of that time.
Yeah, they've had a strong presence in the capital.
So you can see why this whole thing with the presidential palace is so significant.
It's symbolic, but it's also strategic.
If the SAF really has retaken it, even partially,
it's a blow to the RSF.
Especially since they've been trying to set up their own government.
A parallel government.
Right. So retaking the capital, or even just parts of it.
It challenges that narrative.
It says, no, we're still here. We're still the legitimate authority.
Exactly. And that matters a lot in a situation like this.
But we can't lose sight of the human cost of this conflict.
Absolutely.
It's just heartbreaking.
We're talking about a humanitarian catastrophe.
Just the other day, the UN Human Rights Office said dozens of civilians were killed in eastern Khartoum in North Omdurman.
Since March 12th.
And that includes humanitarian volunteers.
People who are just trying to help.
Risking their own lives to provide aid.
And they're getting caught in the crossfire.
It's just unimaginable.
It really shows how little regard both sides have for civilian life.
And then there are the allegations of war crimes.
Yeah, this is where it gets really heavy.
Back in January, the U.S. accused the RSF of genocide.
The second time Sudan has faced that accusation in just a couple of decades.
And this month, UNICEF said the Est was involved in atrocities too.
Including sexual violence against children.
It's just horrific.
These are incredibly serious allegations.
And it's vital that they're properly investigated.
There has to be accountability for these crimes.
And the UN Human Rights Office has been documenting some truly awful things.
What have they been seeing?
Well, they're getting reports of the RSF and their allies raiding homes in eastern Khartoum.
Okay.
carrying out summary killings and arbitrary detentions.
It's taking people away.
And they're also looting food and medical supplies.
From community kitchens and clinics.
Places that are supposed to be helping people.
It's unconscionable.
And the SF and their affiliates are accused of similar things in areas they control.
Looting, arbitrary arrests.
It's just chaos and brutality.
People are living in fear.
They don't know who to trust.
And on top of that, they've lost their homes, their livelihoods, their loved ones.
It's hard to even imagine what they're going through.
It's just a desperate situation.
And then you have someone like Hala al-Karib.
Activist.
Right. She was talking to CNN, and she said this recapture of the palace, it could actually be a real turning point.
Really?
She thinks it might allow some of the internally displaced people to return.
To return home.
At least those from central and northern Sudan.
That would be incredible.
It would be a glimmer of hope in all this darkness.
But she also pointed out that there are still so many questions.
About the future of Sudan.
What comes next?
Like, will the FAF be willing to share power?
To negotiate with the RSF and other political actors?
Or are they just focused on total military victory?
Those are huge questions.
They are, and they're going to determine the fate of the country.
And the fate of millions of people.
And then to make things even more complicated, there was that drone strike on the palace.
What?
Yeah. Local media reported that it was hit by a drone.
Who launched it?
It's not clear.
But there were casualties.
Soldiers and even journalists from the state broadcaster.
Wow, it just shows how volatile this situation is.
And how dangerous it is for everyone involved.
Even in a place like the presidential palace.
Right. And it's important to remember that while this battle for Khartoum is raging, the RSF still controls vast swaths of the country.
Yeah, they're strong in the west, the south, and the center.
Including Darfur.
Where we've seen so much horrific violence.
And the SASF, they're mostly in the east and the north.
So the country is essentially divided.
Fractured.
And that's a huge obstacle to peace.
Because even if one side wins in Khartoum,
the conflict will likely continue elsewhere.
It's a very complex and multi-layered war.
With no easy solutions.
So we have these conflicting claims about the palace.
The SAF says they've won a major victory.
The RSF says the battle is far from over.
And meanwhile, the Sudanese people are caught in the middle.
Facing unimaginable suffering.
And the accusations of war crimes are just mounting.
It's a truly dire situation.
A humanitarian crisis of epic proportions.
And the question we have to ask ourselves
is, what's the path forward?
What does a peaceful future for Sudan look like?
How can they heal these divisions?
And what role should the international community play?
Those are tough questions.
But we have to grapple with them.
If we want to see a better future for Sudan,
a future free from violence and oppression,
a future where people can finally return home and rebuild their lives.
That's the hope we have to hold on to.
Even in the face of such darkness.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a sobering but important conversation.
And we'll continue to follow this story as it unfolds.